Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for joining me. So I have the absolute honor of having an attorney with me. I know I tell everyone I'm not an attorney and I never give legal advice. So here I got a guy. So without further ado, I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and your name, where you're from, what kind of law you practice, and just kind of, we talk about nursing stuff. So that will be the focus of a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about, some nursing stuff. So love to hear about you.
Oh, thank you, Maggie, and it's a pleasure and honor to be doing this with you. I really enjoy following your content, and I'm happy to be part of this new endeavor. So, thank you for the invitation and for having me. My name is Dominic Castillo. I'm a healthcare regulatory attorney with a firm called Hush Blackwell. Rather large healthcare firm. Have about 1,000 lawyers from Boston to LA. Really big firm. A lot of my work involves working with doctors, physicians, providers of all types, I've represented multi-state hospital systems all the way down to solo practitioners and mid-levels and nurses. And some of my work involves board work, which is kind of, I think we're going to talk about today about a lot of the stuff that you do. I represent providers in front of various boards, helping kind of guide them through the process and then dealing with issues that come up. The practice of medicine is an art and a science, and there's many different things that come up, that people, you can do everything correct and outcomes can be bad because that's the nature of that profession. And so a
Science.
lot, yep, right. And so a lot of what I do is to help kind of guide through that when complaints arise, when the board wants to, conduct an investigation. I help, doctors and nurses kind of get through that stuff and understand what the law is, because healthcare is complicated, and then add in all the rules and regulations that govern the healthcare practice. It can get really confusing and really difficult to get through. And so that's a lot of what I do.
Yeah, and let's just pivot off that last sentence you said. So a lot of the rules and regulations can get kind of tricky. So I'm just going to dive into some questions. My audience pretty much knows who I am. I'm Advocate Maggie. I was a prior investigator. I help nurses and their legal teams when they're under investigation. So when one of my biggest things is I always say you got to know the rules and regulations that dictate your professional license. So that's Maggie saying that. So I want you to talk just a little bit about as it pertains to a nurse, the importance of understanding the rules and regulations. And like I tell nurses, it's not, I don't know how many pages the book is. It's like, but oftentimes it doesn't pertain to a lot of the stuff that we do. I tell nurses three roughly sections: standard of practice, unprofessional conduct, and then grounds for discipline. I tell nurses across the United States, focus there. Why do you care as a bedside nurse how school gets approved for, education or whatever it is? That doesn't pertain to you. So oftentimes nurses think, oh, it's so intimidating, but I want you to double down on how important it is, and it doesn't have to be that intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, just keeping it simple, really, right? Like, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about focusing on certain aspects that apply to your practice. Just like the scope of practice, whenever you take a job, you come out of nursing school and your first job isn't maybe in an emergency department. I think that was your background. And,
Yes.
you come in there and there's a lot of things that are specific to that you have to learn. I mean, you obviously know how to be a nurse, but now the practice comes in and you're learning what the contours of your scope of practice is. Kind of the same thing when it comes to professional responsibility and then complying with the law, because there is so much that governs it. If you really focus in on, okay, this is what my job is, these are the things that I'm required to do within the clinical on the clinical side of things, and then just really, if your facility or wherever you work gives you like a handbook, maybe just looking, browsing through the policies and seeing things that impact you. What are my requirements here? You take the legal jurisprudence course and they probably throw so much at you and it's like, oh, what do I focus on? I would focus on the things that do pertain to my practice. And then when questions do come up, I think that's why Maggie and I are kind of doing this and other projects that we're doing together and separately, are to get information out there and to be resources for nurses who do have questions. Because when stuff does come up, you may not know how to deal with a complaint, or you may not know how to deal with something that's come up, or a question just comes up professionally. Maybe it's like, well, it's not really clinical. This has to do with kind of some of their policies. Is this even right? Texas has undergone tons of changes in the law. I was recently working on a case related to the fetal heartbeat law, and it's like, what does that even mean, and how does that affect my practice? And if hospitals are confused about it, I mean, how do they expect everybody else in between to be confused about it? Because they're in the business of understanding that, knowing that stuff. And then, the individual providers out there, like, how do I, if they can't figure it out, how do I figure it out? So that's why, it's important to understand as much as you can, educate yourself as you can, and don't approach it from like, I need to know everything. No, you need to just understand what your job is. And really the most important thing is that, that patient care and safety. As long as you're focused on that from that perspective, everything else we'll figure out. That's when you call up, Nurse Maggie, or you call me, and let's talk through it, because when it does get to a little bit higher level, when you're dealing with, performance improvement issues with your employer, or you're dealing with board of nursing issues, that's when maybe it's time to reach out and say, hey, I have some questions, and I love to chat. I love to chat with nurses to even just put them on the right track. That's really important. But I think just focusing on things that pertain to you, trying to take a stab at reading, maybe some of the regulations. And the Board of Nursing puts out a lot of guidance too, I think, which is helpful. They'll publish, updates, and these are the new rules. I think checking the Board of Nursing website is just, or if subscribe to their e-newsletter, that's really helpful. I find.
Well, so as a nurse in the state of Texas, it's not optional to subscribe. You are subscribed when you hold a
Oh,
license, and so they send it to
gotcha.
you. But so
Okay,
to your point, I do believe that those, because naivety is never defense,
right.
right? I mean, if it is put out, to your point, number one says that you will know and conform. 217.11.1a says I will know and conform to all the rules and regulations that dictate my professional license. And that being said, to your point, those are written in graduate level. And like you talked about, the frequently asked questions off the Texas Board of Nursing website. And we're going to double down, because like this young man said, he's got there's law firm, not necessarily your law firm, but with a law firm that is national. So it doesn't matter what state that you're in, you're still going to go and look. Oftentimes these states do have frequently asked questions on the Board of Nursing. We are talking about Texas, but every state may not have the same structure as, say, Texas does, but they have a regulatory agency, whether it's under Human Health and Services, DHS. I think California, well, I know, is under like the ALJ. So every structure will be different, but there will always be rules and regulations that dictate the practice. So
Yeah, and maybe just as a quick, legal, insider kind of information, the distinction there too is that, you'll have your state legislature that will pass law, right? They'll pass a law. It's like, hey, this is what we want. We need to form a board of nursing to govern our practice of nursing in our state, and through that they pass these statutes, and then that directs the board of nursing to pass regulations. And so there's a distinction between statute and regulation. Now, some regulations are actually copy and paste straight from the statute. The board of nursing will pass a rule that says, hey, all nurses have to have a license, and then in the regulation it says all nurses have to have a license. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll pass additional regulations which have the effect of law, that tell you this is what you have to do. You have to go to accredited school. You have to have so many clinical hours. You have to have a degree. All the requirements, all those regulations. That's kind of the distinction, and then just understanding kind of that interplay between what the regulations say and then the statutes that actually are binding on you, and the enforcement authority that's delegated, the executive branch, if you will, of the Congress or the state legislature, is the Board of Nursing, and
yep.
that's why we deal with a lot of those issues. That's why it's an interesting nuance. One of the first, one of the earliest things that healthcare lawyers have to learn when they start coming into practice is like understand that okay, regulations are law, but they're kind of a rulemaking process that's done by this agency.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for explaining that, because I don't think that in nursing school we get a very robust, and some of it's common sense understanding of, what is this law? Is this a rule? Is this a regulation?
Right.
And
Right.
we learn stuff, to your point, in jurisprudence. We are prepped for that in Texas schools, because Texas is the only state that does require, Texas and New Mexico, I apologize, require all providers to take that course. So if you don't go to school here, you don't necessarily get this stuff. Like I didn't go to Texas school. So
Mhm.
then, some of the stuff I did have to take the jurisprudence, but to your point, that is the great, guidance and understanding administrative law, tying that all back together. Because to your point, three types of law that most nurses, and again, I don't think that we get taught this in school, that once you get handed your professional license, you don't realize that administrative law is a type of law that you get caught up into. And the nurses are like, I don't understand. And I'm like, I know. Okay, let's, they come and talk to you, and then they may bounce back to me, where I'm spending maybe just additional time going over, like, I don't understand what that means, let's talk about that, and how would I find this. And then I'm taking them to well, it says this is the violation on, the complaint that's saying under administrative law from the Board of Nursing, that branch that's sending this to you now, who does have authority to now take away your license, to, discipline you, which
Right.
again, getting into onto a bunch of nuances. But these are things that I find, to your point, that my people don't know, and it is affecting their ability to practice. So that's why I think it's so important. So to you, I wanted to ask you, so let's just pivot just a minute. They nurses get lost in that boring stuff. They don't like
Right.
that. So tell
Right.
us like one of the most crazy stories that you've ever experienced. And just one other question. Have you always practiced in Texas? This is the home state you practice in. I know you said the law firms nationally.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer your second question first. So I do practice I'm only licensed in Texas. At least I have a couple pending, but
Yeah.
I do provide counsel in other states too, because we are a national practice. So I've helped counsel lawyers up in Boston or in Massachusetts when they have questions, because they're what they call the Board of Registration in Nursing and Medicine. They have the same similar setup. They have the same scheme where it comes to, dealing with complaints. And so I've worked with national certifying boards, like if you're specialized in cardiology or plastic surgery. And then nursing boards they tend to approach things similarly. Like I said, I get pulled in on cases, especially like when it comes to the multi-state compact. We've had some, complaints that arise in one state, and unfortunately it's like the dominoes, they all fall. Like you're going to have to report, especially if anything is negative action is taken against your license. So I am a Texas lawyer, and I do focus mainly on our Texas boards, but I've helped across the spectrum just because of the nature of our law firm.
Yeah.
Um, and then to answer your first question, yeah, I mean, so many stories, right? I've been in practice for 5 years. I've been in healthcare for over 13. And you always see all kinds of different things. And I was on the insurance side before I became a lawyer, became on the provider side, which I love. I love being on the provider side. It's, the insurance company, they have their role, but it's a little tough on that side. It's a little less personal. Um, but yeah, so one of my most interesting nursing board cases, was when I started on it actually I was still a summer associate when I got pulled in on it. I came in, and one of our nurses was facing an issue, a pretty serious issue. She had misappropriated some antibiotics. She, thinking that, wasn't going to be missed, and it wasn't like a narcotic or anything. It wasn't, she wasn't taking these drugs to use, and it was taken home, and it was given to a family member, and it was done. It was an IV antibiotic that this family member had received previously, and when she gave it, within 30 minutes, the family member had a cardiac arrest and passed away. And
Oh my
so,
God.
yeah, it
Oh
was
my
such a
word.
nightmare, such a family upheaval. And she, like in that instance, she did the right thing. She reached out, called 911 immediately. She didn't try to obfuscate anything. She didn't try to cover it up. She obviously knew she was going to be in trouble, because, like, where did this come from? And so she was honest about it. She did everything she could. Her first and foremost thought was to try and help the family member that got this. It was like I said, an antibiotic, but the a lot of bad things came out of that. The fallout of that was obviously pretty bad. The Board of Nursing, automatically suspended her license because she had taken drugs. And
Now, let's just stop right there for just 1 second. Is that considered the definition of diversion, misappropriation of a drug, whether it's controlled or not? Is that
Right,
the
right. So
definition of
there's different
diversion?
kind of classes of that, and it just depends
Okay.
on what they decide to come down on. Diversion of drugs refers to the DEA kind of definition, and when
Okay.
when you're taking drugs and diverting them off their course, or you're misappropriating them to use them, and that usually applies in the opiates or the narcotic context, but it can apply to other things, benzodiazepines and other things like that, other classes of drugs. The sanctions with those come at different levels. I mean, you can face, because when it comes to prescribing and administering of medications, there's all the civil penalties that affect your license, the administrative side, but there are also criminal penalties that can affect you
Yes.
too. And so when when it comes, it's really just looking at what you're dealing with, because misappropriation might be used in an administrative law context, while on the diversion and criminal context, that might be something totally different. So in this place, it was their policy. Her it was, I believe, it was a hospital. Their policy was, if any misappropriation, it was kind of a no chance, no strike. You're out, from the first time. And so she was terminated. And then on the
So
criminal side,
terminated, reported to the board of nursing,
yep,
and then
yep,
who report? Oh, obviously there was criminal conduct because EMS was called, right?
yep. She was charged with a felony. So felonies are automatic reports.
Yeah.
Like, you have to report those.
Will you say that 12 times again? If you get a felony, now this doesn't mean that you necessarily will get your license taken away, correct?
Right. Yeah, because there hasn't been a conviction. That you're just required to report felonies to the board. They want to be aware when you've been charged with a felony, because the board has the responsibility of protecting the public. And when it comes to things like felonies that are serious, like some of those types of charges, if they lead to convictions, they are grounds for automatic revocation of your license, and they may be
Does that
grounds
mean?
for suspension as well.
Yeah. So to your point, does that mean that if there was a felony conviction that a nurse can never get their license back?
That one's a little tough, and I was going to kind of share with my case, because
Yeah, please do.
my case is a little bit no, you're good. It's a great question, though. It's a great question. It depends. I haven't seen it, because and it really depends on what the felony is. If the felony directly relates to patient care, patient safety, if you're you're stealing patients' money or something, and you're convicted of it, it may be very tough. It may be very tough to get your license back, because first, what you'll have to do is you'll have to deal with the criminal piece of it. You'll have, like, if you're sentenced to prison, you're gonna have to go to jail, prison. You have to go to prison, not jail. You have to go to prison, and then you have to clear up everything when you get out. Like, you'll have to, any probation stuff, because before the board will consider you, is making sure you've, provided restitution. You've paid back what you're supposed to. You're kind of,
So
to society.
can you work as a nurse? Because I get asked this, and this is something that I'm actually dealing with right now. Can a nurse, while a nurse is serving her restitution, so it was on criminal probation, and you may not know, like, not necessarily in this state, can they practice as a nurse while they're working out their criminal restitution, in your experience?
It depends on what the nature of your license is and what you're doing. Like, if your license is completely revoked, no, you cannot.
Correct.
You cannot practice nursing at all. Now, if you have maybe an agreed order and there's some limitations on there, or maybe they have agreed to, like, because when you go through this stuff, and the nurse that I helped, she had something similar, because she was on probation. They were able to revoke, get her charges reduced and stuff, but she was not allowed to practice medicine because her license was revoked. And there's always questions, and I get, it comes up with other provider types too, where, like, hey, can I do this? I'm still licensed like this. And it's like, well, no, right now they are investigating you for your what you've done, and they need to see you pay that back. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't volunteer somewhere where it doesn't require a license. You can volunteer at like a school or a church, and maybe provide, you have some training, so maybe you can go and do, but as long as it doesn't require a license to practice, you can do some very limited stuff. You can do what basically a layperson or an unlicensed CNA might be able to do, or maybe not a CNA, but like a unlicensed medical assistant might be able to do. But be
Can you
careful. Be
call
careful.
yourself a nurse then? Are you allowed, if you get your license revoked, are you allowed to call yourself a nurse? Can I say I'm a former nurse, or can I write RN behind my name, and am I allowed to call myself a nurse?
Well, you've earned a degree. So, and
Correct.
and this is a question that we get sometimes from law students when they graduate. They have a Juris Doctorate, but they're not licensed attorneys until they've taken and passed the bar, and taken your oath.
Yep.
But so you can use your credential information, your RN after your name, but you cannot represent yourself that you are licensed a nurse. So it's really kind of contextual. You can say you're a trained nurse,
Yes.
but you can't make it, like, by saying I'm a nurse, you are implying that you are
Correct.
licensed. And I think that's very risky to do, especially when you're under investigation. And if you eventually want to get your nursing license back, you don't want to do anything untoward. You want to make sure you're all I's are dotted, T's are crossed, because if you do make any mistakes, the getting your license back is going to be tough. But it
Yeah.
can be done. And so, like, in my story, like, the my nurse, she was charged with murder. Like that happened. She was charged with negligent homicide. Luckily, the prosecutor eventually dropped. And I would also say too, when you're facing criminal charges, you need a criminal lawyer. So
Thank you, sir. Thank
I'm
you
not.
so much.
Yeah, I'm not a litigator, and I don't practice in the criminal area. I do work with those because sometimes those things all converge, and in this case it did. But eventually, they understood what happened. The nurse actually had a very good record, and she made a very, very poor decision, and she understood that. They eventually reduced it down. She was charged with the misappropriation of drugs, which was a lower sentence than like a diversion type charge. She was able to, she was put on probation. Obviously, her license was not restored, but she was able to complete, the requirements of the probation. She wasn't, sent to prison or anything. They actually deferred, adjudicated a lot of the stuff. So, as long as she eventually did complete everything, and all the charges were essentially dropped. Now she still has the arrest on her record. Um, but once that was cleared up, 2 years down the road, she had reached out, and she wanted to see if maybe we get the license back, and we worked on the packet, and it takes some help because again, this whole administrative law piece, all these regulations are tough, and she brought us in, and I was able to kind of go through it and run through her. I was able to put together a really good packet. And the first year she was finished with her stuff and eligible, we applied and we were denied like right away. Like it was almost no consideration, no question about it. And then and you can only do it once a year. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, one calendar year later, had to come back because you can only apply for reinstatement every once a year, once per year. So she came back the next year, and we put together the packet. We made some updates. We got some letters to support because the process itself is lengthy. There's a lot of questions you should respond to. It's all the character and fitness stuff, and the board of nursing has all those regulations if you're curious. But it's a big packet, and we were able to put together. I was able to kind of show the things she was doing to improve herself. She was still kind of taking some current medical education courses to keep herself
Good.
educated and understand what was going on, and just to show that she was still interested. Now, she was not doing anything related to practice. She wasn't, we definitely keeping the boundaries up there. But the second year we applied again. Like I said, putting those letters of support together, showing that she'd been this place for a couple of years. She had been honest. She'd been going to some self-help type meetings. Hers wasn't like a drug issue, wasn't like AA, but it was like
Right.
a counseling type, group type thing. And she had shown that she had been honest since it happened. She had been 100% honest with everybody. And I think that went a long way to taking accountability. I think a lot in my practice, we always try to, you want to be
Yes.
100% accountable. When there's a mistake, we're humans. We're all going to make mistakes. I make mistakes every day. So, those things come up. And the way we presented to that board, I think that it really took on them because they did eventually accept our application. They put a lot of restrictions and she had to enter into agreed order, but she got her license back. So going from a homicide charge, go
No
revocation,
kidding.
go probation, all the way back to redemption and practicing again. It's possible. It's
It
possible.
is.
So, and I
Yeah.
and I share that story because I think it's just telling of like, when you do make a mistake, face it like head on. Don't try to cover it up or hide it because that only really makes it worse. And if you need help, there's resources out like Maggie and myself.
And Dominic,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, we'd love to help you and guide you through it. It's possible, and like I said, things happen, and even in a case where like drug diversion or something occurs,
Yes. Thank
dealing
you.
with those because that's a big part in the law practice and the medical practice. I see
It's
people
30%
struggle.
of all the complaints that are made to are disciplined because I keep up on like what they report. The boards
Right.
normally have to report out. And so they quantify it out. The largest is related to diversion of a drug. Is what I think 30% of all the discipline was related to that. Oftentimes, and I do want you to swing into substance use disorder. That's a huge problem in our area. And then I
Yep.
want you to touch on a little bit DUI as well, if you don't mind touching on that, because
No,
that is a
no.
number one question, whether
Right.
you're a nurse or not, because I see this. So touch on like maybe a declaratory order. So I'm applying to nursing school and I'm being asked, have I ever had a DUI or any kind of conduct? And then I have to claim that. And then if I'm already a practicing nurse, and I get a DUI, what does that mean? Because that all ties into the stuff we were talking about. Peer assistance is the program that most states have if you're involved in, we were touching on a little mental health disorder, substance use disorder. that there more often than not is a program that you can be offered in every state for under fitness to practice. If you do have a substance use disorder or you have a mental health issue, again, I'm not going to speak out of my turn because it would be dictated on the doctor that evaluated you. And then you would have some stipulations. But if you'll just touch on that a little bit, because that is one of the questions that I get asked quite a bit a lot.
Yeah. So, what I would let's just hit the big question out. Like, do I have to report, right? If I'm a practicing nurse, then I get a DUI. Well, it depends. It depends. So as we mentioned earlier, felonies are automatically reportable. So if you're charged with a felony DUI, and there are distinct in Texas, there is two different kinds. You have your kind of misdemeanor DUI, and then you have your felony DUI. If it's a felony DUI, 100% you need to report. When it comes to the misdemeanor, I think it's a little bit more of a gray area. You're not required to, but I would consider it just because you want to be transparent with your employer, especially
Okay,
if
okay, wait, hold on. Let's pause for just 1 second here because I do want to pause here. So like when the last job that I was at, some nurses came to me because there was someone who did get a DUI and they didn't like this person, not my business. And they was like, doesn't she have to report? And I said the same thing you did. And I said, well, what does the policy say at the
right,
organization? Because everyone gets to decide. She was in a leadership position and it said
right,
5 business days. She had to let the organization know.
right,
So the employer is different from the board of nursing. I just want to make sure that
right.
we discriminate that.
Yep, exactly. Because so you're bound by those, right? So your
Yes.
policies that are like that your employer has, they're not law, they're contract. They're an agreement between you and your employer as a part of to perform your job. They agree to pay you some money to perform these duties and to abide by their policies. If their policy says you have to report anything, and a lot of these hospitals, I know because I draft some of the language, is that any adverse action against your license or a criminal charge, if it says anything to that degree, you have to, because
Well,
it
and
could
when you pause
adversely
just a
affect.
little bit, why,
Sure.
on the business side? Now you own the business. Why? Explain why.
Right. Well, I mean, again, so if you're, especially if you're a hospital, you have this kind of like threshold duty to take care of your patients, and you have rules that are federal and state that you're bound by. You have to make sure that everybody's protected, because what happens too is if you're charged with something and then you're still kind of working, but when it comes to drinking and driving, like there's a risk there that there may be a substance problem. There may be an alcohol problem, and all nurses have a duty to report when whether it be themselves or their peer. And the same thing as you go up, it's at every level that they're required to when they notice an issue. And when it comes to, DUIs can happen, right? That totally understandably can happen. That's why in my story I shared I picked that one in particular because of how honest she was. Yes, the outcome was bad, but ultimately she was able to get her license back and go back to work. It may cost you your job. I don't know. Some of the employers understand, like especially if you're a good nurse, you work hard, you're valued, they may take it slower. They're not required to terminate you just because you were charged. They may take a wait and see. Like if you would come to them and explain them. And I know that as legal counsel for these facilities, if that's the story, if that's the case, and and the nurse is talented, they want to keep her, because it's hard right now. They need nurses.
Yeah.
Like they really want to keep them. They're not they're not looking for any reason just to fire you if they can, and they're not just going to fire you just because, perhaps you're in an area where they could. They're not trying to do that. They have a duty to protect their patients, the same as you do. So they want to be aware of what's going on. They don't want to be blindsided. Oh, by the way, I have sentencing coming up next week. Just want to let you know I might be gone for a little while. We don't. That's not the time. You
Right.
want. I always recommend taking the bull by the horns and really just kind of like, let's deal with this. And if you're worried, that's why I think Maggie and I are doing this. Reach out to us.
Yes.
We're happy to walk you through it, answer, like, because also it's not, because you're reporting doesn't mean you have to like give all the nitty-gritty details. I was at a party and do this. Really, what you're just doing is like, this is what happened. Give them the basics, hit them between the eyes with what's going on. Because I do a lot of that. I do a lot of counseling on the approach, on what you should say, and what you're obligated to say, and what you don't really need to say. We don't need to get into the fine details of all this other stuff. Let's just focus on what we're required to report. Let's just keep it simple. Tell them what we need to tell them, and then move on, and then try to see how we can navigate our way through it. But yeah, I mean, even though you're not required to, I would consider it. And also, to Maggie's point about the if it's in your policy, which a lot of them have that,
They do.
you're probably gonna have to. Like,
And most nurses really don't read their I'm not telling you it's right. I mean, but
Yeah.
you'll
Well,
realize we're bound to, we get hit with the employee handbook when we get hired, and
yeah.
general orientation.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
to sign off, and you know this, in our
Yeah.
employee file, it's going to say I reviewed 10 policies. Did I really review them? But
Yeah.
I'm sure going to be held to that. And they will say, well, you
Yeah.
did say that you would, adhere to the handbook, and it says that you had to report within 5 days and you didn't do that. And now that is grounds for possibly termination. And then that could even lead them to reporting me. And now I may not have been reported to the board before had I handled this in a different manner. But then
Yeah.
I have seen where they will terminate and then they're like, we don't know what to do. And so then they end up reporting to the board of nursing and let the board of nursing handle it.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's risky, and I know that there's probably concerns like, oh well, I mean, if I don't have to report to the board of nursing, if I don't tell them, they're not going to report it. Maybe if I can just get by this. It's extremely risky to do it that way. You don't have the legal obligation to tell the board of nursing if it's like a misdemeanor, but if your employer finds out and then you get terminated, they're going to find out anyway.
Yep.
And it always looks worse that way because it looked like you tried to cover it up. You tried to hide, like you didn't tell your employer, so you're fired for not telling them.
What if you
I
know you do have a drinking problem, or you have a substance
Oh,
use
right,
disorder? So I know, and now I just got, either way, either I got a DUI and or I recognize I have a substance use
right.
disorder. What should I do?
Yeah, and so reaching out to the professional the provider program, I can't think of the name right.
Texas Peer Assistance Program.
There you go. Gosh, it slipped my mind. Thank you. Yeah, so you reach out to the peer assistance program and you enroll yourself. Like you self-report, you tell them I need some help. Because a lot of that stuff is confidential. A lot of that stuff is going to be, you don't have to report. Now you're going to have to let them know that you're probably entering into this program, especially if there's anything that affects your license or your ability to work. So, but I think it's so that program is set up to help you. It's intended to give you resources to get through that because it is a prevalent issue in the medical practice and the legal practice. I see it quite a bit. And the goals of the program are to help people get better. They know that people are going to make mistakes, and I have seen more than one redemption case where, yeah, they've made some
You know,
mistakes, with drugs or with alcohol. They've gone and gotten help, and maybe they were limited in some time in their practice. Maybe there was some temporary suspension, or maybe just a bunch of requirements, but they've gotten through it because the idea is to help them get better so they can practice. It's not meant to get anybody in trouble, like directly. Like there may be some associated issues because of anything you may have done, but the idea is to get you recovered, to get you better, and to keep you practicing. I don't think the board of nursing can be very heavy-handed with some stuff, with the way they approach some things. And there's reasons for that, but they're not. I don't think their intent is to just we're gonna disbar as many nurses as we can. We're gonna take as many licenses. That is not the approach. At least that's not the impression that I've gotten. And with my work with them, I believe that they do want to encourage people to get better, to get healthy.
yeah.
And I've
And they
seen
have a great program director, Brittany. I've had the honor of meeting her. Man, she really does advocate for nurses. Seriously. So
right.
I'm going to put a shout out to her. She really is passionate about helping nurses who have issues. And by all means, and we're talking about Texas specifically, but every state does have some form of peer assistance program. And,
Yep.
to Dominic's point, some of it will be the reporting of it or how they run the program, maybe just some variations, but even for physicians, they offer a peer
Yep.
assistance, even for nurses, they do both of those. So let's talk about, so what if I got a DUI or a PI, personal intoxication, prior to me becoming a nurse, and now I'm applying to nursing school? What does that look like?
So when you're filling out your application, and these are going to be different depending on what school you're enrolling in, but when you declare for the nursing board, I mean, if it asks the question, it says any arrests, you have to report it. And they're not going to hold things against you just because you have something in your past. They're not going to hold things against you. You're not license isn't going to be predicated on, oh, I made some mistakes when I was younger. I had this PI, DUI. You would have to provide some additional information of what occurred. Like, this is why this has occurred, and be thorough. Tell them, explain. Yes, yes. I was in college. I was out drinking with some friends. We got picked up for PI because we were drunk. But I took a class. It was deferred adjudicated. It's not on my record, but reporting it just full disclosure because they can be thorough in their background checks. They can go back and even it's like, oh well, that happened back in I was in Georgia at the time, and now here I'm in Texas. they find some stuff, especially the compact states. Like they share data, they share a lot of information with each other. It is very, if you're a student, it's very risky to not
So what
disclose
if I
something.
lie? What if I lie on that application? What does that look
Oh,
like?
then you face total not getting your license.
Okay.
Like it is 100% worse, a million times. I'm gonna say more than that worse to
Well,
not
you
report it. And
and it's
now
called
you
a
might.
declaratory order. And he touched on this a little. So declaring it means that each state has like is a law or a rule that has the declaration of any prior conduct, and that could have been an arrest through the school, or even if you come to endorse in the state, you will have to declare. Or what if I'm already an LPN and now I'm going to RN school, or I'm getting a additional education? Do I still have to declare something to the board that I've already declared, even though I'm going to school for a second time?
So do you mean when you're trying to get another like nursing license?
Yes.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
it's a new nursing license, yes. Every time you
Okay.
apply for a new nursing license, you're gonna have to make that declaration every time. Now, under the compact, you can, as long as you've gotten like a home state license and you have the multi-state version of the license, then you don't have to in those cases because that home state has already done their homework and
Okay.
now they will report that information because they
Yep.
share data, and so that information will probably likely be sent on to the compact state, but it's not incumbent on you to have to make that declaration. But when you're going for new licensure, when you're applying to schools, yes, you have to disclose.
Okay. And then, so one of the other questions, so if, let's just say I get disciplined on my license and now so I just want to talk about some of the restrictions. So we've touched a lot on like agreed orders. And so what we talk about like what is an agreed order. And then, we talked a little bit about like what would be the discipline or the stipulation under like a peer assistance. And we just talk about what some of those, and those are not forever. It's not, there's a certain length of time that goes along with that period. We discussed a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So agreed orders are, if you have a complaint that arises from the medical, or excuse me, the Board of Nursing, and you're going through the complaint and they say, well, we've investigated this, we've found that you violated some, aspects of the Nursing Practice Act and the Board of Nursing regulations, and we're going to enter into this order, this agreement, the agreed order, right? And
That
it's
could be with
agreed,
a DUI as well, correct?
right?
That could be applicable. So not necessarily always related to practice. It could be related to criminal
Yeah.
conduct.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Anything that's any violation of the standards that relate to your practice or to your, anything in your personal life, whether it be like some
Thank
type of
you.
arrest or charge. Yes. Yes. It can be any of those things. So yeah. So maybe if you get, arrested and maybe potentially convicted for a misdemeanor DUI, you've entered the program, we will likely face an agreed order. And what that means is that, okay, we know you're a good nurse. We know you're not going to go to prison. You are going to have all these requirements, that you're going to have to get through. You might be on probation. You'll probably have to pay some fines on the criminal side. That's on the criminal side. But now you're going to enter into this agreement with the Board of Nursing to potentially, it could limit your practice, right? It could limit, say, hey, you can only see patients at a certain time. Maybe you can't see any. Some of it may just be limited, like you have to be supervised in a certain way. You have to report to the Board of Nursing. You have to take so many hours of continuing medical education. You have to there's any kind of number of things that they might impose on you in regards to like an agreed order. And so your job is to comply with that order to the T. You'll have a case manager that you'll report to let update them on what your progress on and making sure you're hitting all the milestones in your agreed order. And once you do all that, upon successful completion, it does, they'll wrap it up, they'll remove all those restrictions, and you'll return to full practice. And agreed orders are, they're not always the best because now you have all these extra requirements, and especially if there's like another case kind of pending or other issue, probation, other things hanging out there. But they are, it's a tool for the Board of Nursing to ensure that you are, still fit to practice. And they're not a death sentence. You'll be able to get jobs.
Let's say that again.
Yep, you'll be able to get jobs. Like they still will hire you. You still will be hired. Yes, it'll be reported on your profile, but those things are not insurmountable. They're not, especially in this day and age where we do need more nurses. The staffing shortages are pretty bad right now. But really just working with the board to make sure you're compliant, because you don't want to run afoul of that agreed order, because if you do, then they can reopen your case and like, okay, well, now we're going to give you the full range of punishments that we can do, and they can go above and beyond, which can include losing your license, suspending your license. And that will look a lot worse than somebody who had a complaint, they dealt with it, they did handle the criminal side, they got through their agreed order, and it's all good. That looks a lot better when the hiring people and the recruitment folks at these different healthcare providers, when they're looking at that stuff, they will look more favorably when they see, okay, yeah, they complied with the agreed order, it was dismissed, it happened 3-4 years ago. Okay, there's been no issue since, there's no complaints that we see that are pending. We would love for you to come and join us.
Yeah. So the agreed order could also be a formal charge, but it's just something that the board is saying, basically, it's not optional, that this is what you will, this is what you're going to do. And then it lasts for a certain period of time. Some of the stuff you talked about, oftentimes you may have to work in an environment where you have to be monitored. Has to be an RN more often than not, because I was the one, not necessarily typing them up, but I was merging these in. You have to work minimum of 64 hours a month, which is normally part-time for a nurse. So there will be these strict, not always definitely strict. Now, I do find that Texas, as far as fines and some of the other stuff, is just a little bit more fair than some of these other states, but it's only for a certain period of time. So just as we're, wrapping it up, and I really appreciate you taking time with me, I don't want it always to be, Debbie Downer all the time, but what can nurses do when we not necessarily just related to some of these, issues, but I'm big on talking about like documentation. When it comes down to any complaint, more often than not, it's going to be on the practice side. It will come down to what you did or did not document, having
Yep.
professional liability insurance. And then to your point, if there are any questions that a nurse has, and to your point as well, when we're talking about agreed orders or formal charges, this is something you should never be doing by yourself. This is why you're coming to Mr. Castillo and you're saying, hey, I need some help with this. And things can be rewritten. I've worked with attorneys and I said that allegation, because, we both knew, the attorney and I both knew this is not going away. She's going to have to sign this. So let's rewrite the allegation. So what did I do when I was retained? That's what I did. I rewrote the allegation, and then I worked with the nurse, because what's always going to be front facing, the response that the nurse gives, and then negotiating that with the board of nursing. Because to your point, when your employer comes and looks, it will be on nurses, nursys.com for life. And so you want that to look as benign as possible. And that's why you always work with legal counsel. So just following back up, nurses
Or a nurse advocate, a
or
very
a nurse
good
advocate, or
Yes,
together, right? Because this is
right.
my biggest piece, is that the educational piece. The nurse feels so much shame, and so I try to help them put some of that down. And then
Yeah.
if they can understand what's happening, then they can have a better conversation with you, because now they understand. I've watched Under Investigation. I do understand what agreed order is. So when you're using those words, they're a better participant, because they understand some of those things. They put the cancer diagnosis down for a minute, and now they can have some educational conversation with you about, okay, what is going to be my best option here? I'm not going to get out of this, but let's work through some of these things. So swinging back to my initial question, I'm huge on documentation. I've been a civil expert and then administrative, and a nurse is like, I didn't document it. I'm like, wait, what? Wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, documentation is the number one issue. Whether I'm in front of the medical board for doctors or the nursing board for nurses or any other board or specialty organization, medical documentation is the number one issue, and it affects 99.9% of my providers. Everybody has documentation stuff, whether it be not putting enough notes in or not being, clear, not elaborating, and it's hard. Like you see lots of patients, you're charting constantly. It feels like you're probably charting more than you're caring for patients, and that's a challenge into itself, and that's probably a whole other policy discussion that we could have.
No kidding.
But there's kind of an unwritten rule that both boards approach, that if it's not in the record, it didn't happen.
Not
And
charted, not done, not charted, not done. And my people know this language.
yeah, and that's, I mean, again, we can always put forth the argument that, yes, that medication was given, or yes, this evaluation was done. We can put that in there, but it's tough. It's a tough hill to climb, and if you didn't document it, man, it can be tough. But those things are overcomable. It's just really staying up to date, making sure you're like treating your patients, and then you're putting it in there. You're being as clear as you can. I mean, obviously being quickly, because you're trying to get from, each patient and go through each chart.
But
But
so
yeah,
let's just say that there's an incident or a fall. Are you click boxing? Or are you not writing a note? Are you
I
writing
think
a note?
I think if it's a fall, you should be 100% documenting. You want to say exactly what happened because
Touch on that fall for just a minute because that's what I'm going to be. That's one of my other focuses. I'm big on that one specifically because I've seen a lot of poor outcomes around
yeah.
falls, and then the poor documentation around that.
Yep. Because the falls, even minor falls, like I've seen snowball into stuff because what happens when the state comes in to inspect and like they're pulling MSDSs and they're not seeing documentation. They're just seeing click like, oh, there was a fall, but what happened? There's no information. And the patient is making all kinds of allegations. I mean, your facility can get in a lot of trouble. You can get a bunch of trouble and, even for minor stuff can be a big deal. And then, sometimes falls do, especially when it comes to our more vulnerable populations, our elderly, like if they may have outcomes that are not recoverable. They
Yep.
may not, I
Blood
mean,
thinners, they fall. A lot of people don't realize. I've seen this
oh
recently.
yeah.
Patient
Yep.
was on a blood thinner, had to bleed. They didn't mobilize this patient. You already know they did not make it.
Yeah,
There
those are
was no
tough. Those are always
documentation.
so bad, and those are always so sad too. Like, it's just tough, and that's why it's important to document. Stuff is going to happen. You do your best to follow the guide. Like, what are the orders here for this patient? Are they supposed to be in restraints? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But just document what you have. Put down what happened, and be as clear as you can be, because this may come back up. It may come up in front of the Board of Nursing. It may come up in front of, Medicare. It's the state, the regional
So what
office.
if my job tells me, so I'm in a long-term care facility, for example, the patient falls, my employer, licensed or not, is telling me not to call 911 and transfer this patient out, even though I know that they're on the blood thinner. I know what the standard of care is. I know what the standard of care is. Is my duty to call 911 when I know that that patient needs to be a higher level of care, even though the DON or the administrator is telling me, nah, it's okay. We don't want you to transfer them out.
You are the licensed professional. You have been trained to do certain things. You understand what your scope of practice is. If you feel that your patient is in a situation where they need emergency care, you call 911 regardless of, your direct supervisor could be standing there. If you feel, and I mean, and it can be a little bit subjective, but if you feel like, oh, my patient is bleeding, they're on blood thinners, I'm concerned that if we don't get this taken care of, this could be bad. You have a duty to your patient to care for
Right.
them and
When
protect
we
them.
give discharge instructions and it's written on the pill bottle that if you're taking this medication and you trip or fall and you have to go to the hospital, then we too will be held to that. And so when I talk about this as well, it will be what a prudent nurse would or would not do in that same or
Right.
similar circumstance. So there will be an expert nurse who'll be more than happy to write up a report about all the deviations of the standard of care. So to your point, you better be willing to put up your right hand to defend that, because it's not that, even if it's a physician, it's you have your
Oh, yeah.
own license. And even if the doctor is saying, because it could come back on them, they
Yeah.
don't want you to do something. No, your duty is always to the patient. And 1514 in this state says, for a nurse, I have a duty to the patient that supersedes a hospital policy or physician order. So
Yep.
that will be used against you. So
Yeah,
I
and,
talk
and,
about
and
some.
this context that can come up in multiple contexts too. Like, I've represented some, surgical assistants who have had that issue too, where they've been, hey, this doesn't look right. You're asking for something that I don't know what we should be doing. You should totally call it out. You should call a timeout. You should say, no, I don't think this is right. Like, you have a duty to protect the patient. These doctors, yes, they're really good at what they do. They're brilliant. They make mistakes. They are human beings also. I think there was a case I read about in Florida about, them taking out the liver instead of the
Yes.
it's instead of the gallbladder. I think it was like horrendous. That killed the patient. And if you're just standing there like, I know a little bit of my
So does the
anatomy study.
scrub tech have an obligation? And this is a
Yeah,
great question because a lot of people don't know this, but
yes.
the
If
scrub
you
tech
have a
is not
license,
like, okay, but they're not,
oh, the tech, the unlicensed
the
tech. Yeah, right.
the scrub tech now does have, I think the surgical scrub tech, it has a license, but it's an extension of the doctor, right? That would fall under the medical board, just like a rad tech, like an MA, different from the RN or an LPN, which would be very different to my understanding. But please elaborate on that just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. The unlicensed folks is a little bit different because they don't have that same kind of like governing enforcement. Also, because they're not licensed, there's not a universal type training. Like, they don't undergo. They're supposed to, but there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Then you have to kind of defer to the policies, what your operating room policies are, on what that is. But I think, again, if ultimately it's a public safety issue, like, it's a
Yes.
patient safety issue. If
Yes.
you feel that something is unsafe,
If you
then
stood there as the surgical tech for 3,000 cases. You know, he is not
Right.
supposed to be taking out that liver. You just,
Right. Yeah.
hey, wait, what are we doing?
Hey,
So to your
timeout.
point,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, you
Yep.
have
I
a
need to call
duty.
timeout. This is not safe.
Wait, that's the liver you're clamping there, buddy. Are you
Right.
sure that's what we're trying to do here?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
that stuff, unfortunately, and in those cases, they come up a lot of times because people are a little bit intimidated. And I get it. I get it. Those doctors, they come in there, I mean, they're not your boss, but kind of are. It's a weird area, but don't, if it comes to your patient safety, you have a fiduciary duty, and fiduciary is a fancy term, which is means the highest duty in the law to care for them, to make sure that they're safe, that you put your own stuff on to the side to put your patient's safety first. And so that's really what I would encourage you to do, to kind of overcome that little bit, to say, with all due respect, doctor,
Yep.
please, we're timeout. This is not safe. This
Yeah, and there's plenty of people in that room for you to escalate that with, and we're
right.
team players.
Yes.
To your point, but
Yep.
thank you for touching on that because I that gets a little bit tricky as well because people are a lot, don't understand. Well, what if I'm not licensed? So ultimately, because the physician would be held accountable
Yeah,
for,
yeah. The doctors are
but
at the end of the day always kind of ultimately responsible. So in my little like preview of the medical board side, for everything, when it from billing to communications at the front desk, they are ultimately responsible for everything. But no, regardless of that, you should always approach it from, I'm a licensed practitioner. I also have duties, obligations, responsibilities, because you don't want it to affect your license either. And if you disagree and then they tell you, sorry, sorry, you stay over there, I'm going to keep doing it. You've met your obligation. You've done what
yep,
you could outside of, something physical, which I do not recommend. If the doctor goes ahead and does it, well, you did what you could. You voiced your concern,
yeah,
document it in the record. You let them, this was not right. I tried to stop it. They kept going.
yeah.
You can only do what you can do, like within your power to do. So stuff comes up. I think for most part, if you're on a good team, they will respond right away, like, okay, hey, Nurse Maggie's got a concern. Let's stop here. What is
Yeah.
going on? What are we doing? Let's see where we are. There's nothing wrong with that. There's totally nothing wrong with that.
And if you're at a place where it's not respecting that, then exit left
I mean,
because
it
do
gets
not
risky.
stay in a place where things are happening. Not only that, that morally burns us out because
Yeah,
it's grotesque as to stand there unethically. And not only that, you are risking your license and or if you're risking some form of litigation because to your point, when I was telling the Texas University women's university nurses, we were talking about like, jurisprudence was like the basic topic. Redonda's case was the one we we're talking about. We were touching on a little bit malpractice and negligence and what these words kind of mean. I'm like, you're sitting in school, so you know what you're getting, the education, training, and knowledge. You know what hijacks you? That's that right there. This house.
right.
Because now you have the education, training, and knowledge, you are held to a standard. What would a prudent nurse do or not do in the same or similar circumstance? So
Yep. Yep.
we
And
will,
really, and at the end of the day too, it's what you can show, like, and it's at the time, right? It's easy to, like, Monday morning quarterback a lot of the stuff. This is always my approach, is to remind the board and this is why, like, I feel like,
yep,
having you, Maggie, and I as your advocates are important, because we're able to say, hey, look, we are triaging this. This came in, this was an emergency situation. We're just trying to keep the patient's airway going. We're trying to keep, yes, I didn't really, I probably should have, done this or that. It's easy to say that, but I was running through my own checklist of what I understand the standard of care is, because the standard of care is not always A, B, C, D, E, F. Sometimes it's like, okay, are they breathing? Do we have a heartbeat? Like, you
there's a pandemic, there's a
yeah.
snowstorm. I
Oh,
mean, there's
yeah,
going to
yeah.
be
We're
mitigating
COVID. Yeah,
circumstances.
yeah. Oh, you weren't masked up or whatever, something like, well, the patient was bleeding. Like, those things come up. And so, yeah, so maybe you didn't do everything precisely. That doesn't matter. We want to look at the situation holistically. We want to see, did you do what that it can be broad, right? That reasonable
Yep,
prudence. It can be a little broad
yep,
because art and a science, right? What we started off with, like, this is an art and a science. So it's not, just because of one reasonable prudent nurse would have done this doesn't mean another reasonable prudent nurse might have done something, similar or
right.
slightly.
Because you documented it, and so we know what you did, and so then
Right.
it's easy to find, and
Yep.
so
Yep.
Um, well, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up with that. I really appreciate you taking the time and spending with us and talking
Yes,
to my
absolutely.
audience. I think it's so very important. The lack of education as it pertains to our, license is so profound. And we touched on, making sure that you contact, a lawyer if you're investigated by, the border nursing. You should
Or
absolutely
Nurse
have
Maggie too. She
or
can
your
help guide you
Emmy,
too.
yes. And my first question to you is going to be, do you have professional liability insurance? And if you don't, that's not a deal
Mm.
breaker. I
Yep.
do highly suggest that you do get it, but we
Yeah,
will
especially
be
if you're an
reaching out.
independent nurse practitioner,
Oh
any
God, yeah.
those higher level, especially if we have any standing delegation order or prescriptive authority. I think I mean, I've helped, I've worked with some, on the transactional side, setting up some, clinic and standing delegation or practices. I highly, highly recommend it because you, in a lot of senses, are acting like a doctor, especially if you're
Yeah.
prescribing. I highly recommend, and
I, I I highly recommend it. I don't even think it's optional. To that's just my opinion. Because again, why and we say this because we know that it's financially the amount of money that it could possibly cost you and the
right,
conflict of
right,
interest. And you're a nurse practitioner, you're more likely to be involved in litigation than the LP and the RN just by the mere your role as an
yep,
LIP. So
yep,
doubling down on what you said, it is worth the amount of money that it is because not only that, and I want to plug Dominic here just a minute again. So if you're a nurse practitioner and you're starting a practice, you're even an RN. I don't care if you're an LPN. I'm in the nurse innovator creator space as well. So I tell nurses when it comes to whatever you're doing, you're a new nurse entrepreneur, you're writing a policy or you have stuff front facing on your website. And let's just say for an RN who's doing some nurse coaching, which I've seen recently, and now they took some of the stuff that they learned in this course, they put it on their website, and it does appear that they're practicing outside their scope. There was no malintent, but had they come to you from the very beginning and you would have said, or myself, us together would have said, no, you can't say this. Now, I understand you're doing holistic nursing and stuff, and that's okay, but we're going to X out sections 3 through 20 because you cannot say that. But let's
yeah,
insert this. But now she's standing in front of the board of nursing, and as opposed to,
yeah,
coming to you and having, looking through some policies, some procedures, something could be very affordable, may not be reimbursed by the professional liability insurance, although we do support that. But if you do get investigated, there's litigation because you involve Dominic, there's going to be a policy or the board of nursing, and then the
yep,
subpoena that's written to the practice, independent of what's written to the nurse practitioner, there will have to be policies produced, but you already met with Dominic, so you already have those. So you know what the board of nursing is, okay, we're done here. We're going to drop that.
yep,
So that's
yep,
why it's so very important that as a nurse practitioner, a CRNA, anyone, even like a PA, now PAs more often than not, they do have to work under doctor, and I'm way leaving my lane, but these are all reasons why you would want to reach out to Dominic to make sure that, Mr. Castillo and his practice, that you are getting your stuff lined up, because if you have any kind of litigation, it will be those type of things that will protect you, that and the professional liability insurance, charting. And then just tell us again your practice, whatever you're comfortable with sharing with my
yeah,
audience.
yeah. No,
No,
no, of
just
course,
I'm
of
going to put
course.
those in the show notes as well.
Yes, yes, no,
But just
absolutely. No, and I'll a quick thought. My mentor coming up through this stuff, he's done board practice for almost 40 years, and very well respected out there. And he always says, you pay us now or pay us later. So like when you're forming a
yeah.
business or forming, and I do this. I practice in healthcare. I do everything except for the actual kind of criminal litigation piece. I do everything in between though, whether you're forming a business, peer review, all the things in between, nursing staff issues at your facility, and regardless of the facility, like I said, every facility type I've been a part of, ASCs and long-term care and residential and SNFs. I've done it all. I've seen it all, and so yeah, I'm always here to help. I'm here. I always like to take a phone call, just chat with you, guide you. If it makes sense to work together, we can work together. And if you have the liability practice insurance, they'll pick up my tab a lot of the time. So it's another good protection because then you get good legal representation in there. But I'm always happy to talk. I work at a firm called Hush Blackwell. My email is dominic.castillo Hush Blackwell. Now, Hush Blackwell spelled a little weird. It's spelled Husch and then Blackwell, BLACKWELL.com. But dominic.castillo Hushblackwell.com. Google me. I'm on Google. You do Dominic Castillo HB. There's another like musician Dominic Castillo out there. I'm not a musician, but it's not me. But yeah, just Google Dominic Castillo, lawyer, Austin. I'm here in Austin. I practice in
Teaches at the law school. He teaches as
I
well.
teach, yeah, yeah. So
Yep.
my little background back there, I teach health law to law students. Yep, yep. And I'm actually going to be helping one of my law partners teach to some healthcare executives at Texas A&M in the spring. So yeah, I love talking about healthcare. I've been around for a little while. I love working with nurses, especially that I know that stuff can be challenging. So don't be intimidated also by like any cost. Like there's not going to be any cost to chat. I am happy to chat with you. If it makes sense to work together, we'll talk about fees. If you don't have insurance, don't let that be a barrier. Never let that be a barrier. Please call Maggie, call me. We want to chat with you. We want to guide you. We're happy to help. We're here to help.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking your time. It's the day after Thanksgiving, and this guy's donating his time to me, so to us,
Yeah, happy
um,
to do it.
to the cause. Because again, it is about, I tell nurses all the time, I can slap up all these band-aids, but if you don't have professional liability insurance and you don't chart, you're not reaching out to legal counsel, it does make some of these things a little bit harder. So I appreciate you taking the time to, dissect some of these harder concepts for my people and everything that you do for nurses. So I do
Yeah.
appreciate. In the show notes, I will have his contact information and link to all his stuff and his email address. Not going to give you his personal bat phone number, but I will make sure that you have his contact information. So please, I reach out to him. If I have a question or I have a concern, I send nurses his way. He is someone that I do believe in. So please don't hesitate to reach out to him. So
Yep.
thank you so much
Well,
for
thank
joining
you
me.
for having me, Maggie. Again, like I said, I'm a huge fan. If you're not following Maggie on TikTok or other platforms, please do, because I'm a huge fan. I love her content. It's some of the best. So thanks
Why,
for
thank
having me,
you,
Maggie.
sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, folks.